Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join me today on this webinar. We're going to be discussing the dev to prod process, configuration, and best practices. So just a couple of ground rules. We do have a Q&A section on the Zoom chat. So let's post those questions there. We do have a moderator that is monitoring that and will answer your questions. We do see some questions come in through chat, which is okay, but the Q&A is where the questions are preferred to be placed. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so first start off with introductions. My name is Paul Overton. I am a customer success architect. A bit about me, I started in help desk and tech support, eventually moved into becoming an analyst at FineTech. Then after that, I moved into network automation and then became a technical account manager for endpoint agent and EDR. So I've seen a lot of things in my career here, and now I saw the need for bringing all of these different pieces of the puzzle together. So that's really the reason why I joined XSOAR, to help people build those bridges, right, and connect the different systems, make sense of all the data amidst the noise. We're also joined by Cole Lisco. He is going to be fielding the questions and answers. He's a senior customer success architect, and he's been working at Palo Alto Networks, supporting Cortex for over 2 years. He specializes in case development, XSOAR use case best practices, and utilization of the platform. So that's who we are. And moving on, we're going to talk about the agenda. So first I wanted to just talk about the demo, how I built the demo, and some just kind of general, answer some general questions that might kind of come up around how I built the demo. Then we're going to talk about the dev to prod. What is it, the benefits, and also the requirements. The webinar is going to be really heavy on demo. I'm going to show how we can enable, configure the remote repositories, and then demonstrate change control methodologies, review branch management and merge process. And then once the demo is over, we'll get into setting you up for success and some frequently asked questions. And then there should be some time for a general Q&A. So that's going to be the overall structure of the webinar. So with that said, we'll get started. So how did I create this demo? I created it using GitLab, but I did want to make sure everybody knew that Azure DevOps, GitHub, and Bitbucket are also supported. So the fundamentals of the demo still apply. If you're using a different repo, that's quite all right. The demo will not cover the CI/CD process, multi-tenant deployment and configuration, or the simple dev to prod pack. The servers I'm using are hosted, so for any of our hosted customers, this will work just fine. And the principles still are the same for any on-prem servers as well. I'm going to be going through the demo pretty quick. I think the number one question that sometimes comes up when I do these presentations is the SSH key. The RSA private public keys are required. I will be using the following command to generate the key. And just to note that if you use a different port other than 22 for SSH, it has to be defined. So those are some of the things I'm going to be going over in the demo, but just wanted to point that out. Okay, so what is dev to prod? At a high level, dev to prod is really the cycle of creating, managing, and testing and deploying changes. The name implies 2 environments. We say dev to prod, and a lot of customers that I work with have just 2 environments, which is definitely perfectly okay. On our hosted solution, you're provided with the dev and prod. So typically 2 environments is what I see most often. However, I do also encourage using a third, which I'm going to be demoing today, which is our user accepted testing environment or a QA environment. This way you can test drive your changes before you decide to push them into prod. So the benefits of the dev to prod is increased change control visibility, which is going to be, I think, good for organizations to understand, what was changed. I think the biggest problem that I see that a lot of my customers have that aren't using something like dev to prod, they don't know what changed, when it changed. So if something goes wrong, it can be difficult to go back and undo those changes. So you'll know who made the change and what changed, which will reduce your overall risk. If you push something into production and it breaks, then as we all know, that can be a very bad situation. And it can also reduce the complication of pushing changes. With XSOAR, you do have the ability to download content and upload content, but of course you're going to have to download packs. You'll have to download your layouts. There's a lot of moving parts into making the automations work. So the dev to prod just really simplifies that process, which we're going to show today. So the hardware and licensing requirements, the recommended hardware requirements for a dev is listed here. It's 8 CPU cores, 16 gigs of RAM, and 500 gigabytes of storage. SSD is required, and the production minimums are listed there. This is on our public documentation. One thing that we do recommend, or that I recommend, if you decide to leverage a UAT environment, I would recommend using the production minimum. Now, with the development environment, it is, of course, less resource intensive, but it does assume a lighter incident load and integration ingestion. So the concept of having a dev environment really is to make sure that you're just pulling in a couple of incidences, getting the context data, building out your playbook from there, not pulling in thousands of incidents into your dev environment. That's really where you want to have a user-accepted tested environment. So the license requirement for this, you do have one production and one non-production, which is sent when you first purchase XSOAR. However, you can request an additional non-production license. This is where you'll be able to use for your user-accepted test environment. So here's how you can get 3. If you have questions about how to do that, feel free to contact your CSM or account manager for those details. Okay, so with that, now we're gonna get into the demo. So I have here set up 3 different environments, my production, my UAT, and my, this is my dev, UAT, and production. So right off the bat, I do want to point out, it's really difficult to see which environment's which. So we have the XSOAR icon. I'm logged in as admin. I just have an IP address. So one of the first things that I always recommend is to do something to distinguish your environment, so it's more clear what is your dev, what is your production, etc. So one of the ways that we do that, or I like to do that, is we go to settings, about, and troubleshooting. And we scroll down, and here we have a full-size logo, and here we have a minimized logo. So I'm going to go ahead and do the full-size logo, and this is my dev environment. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to go to my minimized logo. And I'm also going to select my dev environment. Dev icon. So what we should see now is when it refreshes, the minimized logo shows me my dev here. So now I know when I'm looking at this, even though I just have an IP, that I know I'm in my dev environment. And when I go and log out here, I now see my Cortex has been replaced with that dev icon. So it's very clear now that I'm in my dev environment, where before that wasn't so clear. So I'm going to do the same things now in my UAT environment. So again, it's settings, about, troubleshooting, and my UAT. And again, I'm going to just use my minimize logo for fun, make it look a little different. So you can see my minimize logo now just has the check and X button. When I scroll over, I have my UAT. When I log out, now I have my UAT environment. And so now here's my production environment. So I'm just going to quickly do the same thing here. Here's my production. And again, I'm just going to select my production icon. So you can use the same icon, and that's perfectly fine. So now I know that this is production. Great. So now that I have those set up, I need to set up the servers for being able to install the remote repo. So as you notice here, I'm in my settings. In my advanced, I don't have anything where I can add the content repo. So that actually needs to be added in advanced server settings. And just so you're aware, the advanced server settings are the same for hosted and on-prem solutions. So again, that's about troubleshooting. And I'm going to add the server configuration here. The key that I'm going to add is going to enable the UI. So this is in our documentation, which is going to be included with the recording. But for right now, I'm going to just go ahead and put in the UI version control show remote. I'm going to set that value to true. Okay, we successfully saved. And I'm going to go ahead and just refresh real quick just to make sure that goes in. And I'm going to do the same thing on my UAT environment. The other thing here that we want to make sure of is that we're logging in as admin when setting these up. So here I'm going to add my server configuration, UI version control show remote. I'm going to set that as true. And then I'm going to go ahead and log into my dev environment. Settings, about, troubleshooting. Okay, great. So now I have those settings in, and the next thing I want to do is set up my branches here. So I am using GitHub, and I've already set up a project, the XSOAR Dev to Prod webinar. So now I go to my branches, and I always recommend keeping the main. I don't edit this to make this my QA or my prod. I just create new branches. So I'm going to create 3 branches. It's okay to create it from main. So I'm going to create a prod branch. And then I'm going to create my UAT branch. Okay, great. And then I'm going to create my third branch for my production. For my dev, sorry about that. Okay, great. So now the branches have been set up, and I'm going to go back to my my servers here. And as you can see now in advance, I have my content repository. And let's see. And my production. If we go back to settings, about troubleshooting, make sure I added that in correctly. UI show control is true. I'm going to go ahead and just try to re-add that. Okay. So while that's propagating, I'm going to go ahead and now set up my content repo on my dev environment. So I go to content repo here, and I have now an option, private content repository. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And here I see I can toggle between production and development. I'm going to go ahead and keep it on development. Now I need my content repo URL. So where you can get that in the GitLab, I typically just go to clone, and here we're going to be connecting with SSH. That is the required. So I usually just kind of pull this from there. Now, again, I am on a unique environment because I have this hosted. So my content URL is going to be using that GitLab link, but I have to make some modifications here to get that to work. So here I see the SSH ://get. Now my modifications had to be an alt SSH for the GitLab, and you see I have here defined the SSH over 443. So that's what mine looks like. Now that might be different for your environments. Typically for most customers I work with who I help set this up, none of this is required. But in case you do, you would want to work with your admins to make sure you have the right URL defined here. So the next step is to add the SSH key. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my command prompt and generate the key. Okay. So here is the line that I'm going to be using. And so I'm going to be putting in an email. So now, as you could probably tell, I'm not signed into the server to do this. So this does not have to be generated on the server. I think that's the other common question that I get is where can this be generated? Some customers prefer to generate it on the XSOAR server, which is fine. And if you're hosted, you don't have access to that. So just generating it from your workstation is just fine. If you are doing it on some type of flavor of Linux, this line might need to be modified a little bit, but for the purpose of the demo, this is going to work just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and save it, just default. Now you do have the opportunity to use a passphrase. For the purpose of the demo, I'm going to leave this blank, so I'm not going to type anything in. It's going to ask for the same passphrase again. Again, I'm not going to put anything in here. And it's done, it's been generated. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that. And now I'm going to bring up my, my keys here. Okay, so here are the keys that I just generated right now. I have my private key. This is the key that's going to be put into the server. Here's the public key. This is what's going to be put into GitLab. As you can see here, I have that email address, and then I have the SSH RSA. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this private key in. Make sure there's no spaces. That's the other common thing that I see happen here. So if there's a space, just go ahead and delete that space. Then I'm going to go to GitLab, and I'm going to just go ahead and search for my SSH. It's typically in user settings, but I search in GitLab and it takes me right there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this key. I'm going to add my new key in, and bring up Sublime. And now here's my, go to the public key. Okay. So you can change the title. So I'm just going to do dev prod webinar. And then I'm just going to choose an expiration date. You can say just a year from now. Okay, so add that key in. And now that's done. You only need to add the key to your user. There's no ability to add the key directly to your project. Okay, so just wanted to go ahead and mention that. So I see that happen often as well, or a question that comes up. So now that I have those in, I should be good to go to select my branch. Now, what's going to happen when I select my branch, it should communicate properly to GitHub. Or sorry, the GitLab, which, yay, we've had success. So here we see my branches. Again, I have main. It's going to pull all the branches. I typically just leave main alone. In this scenario here, I'm going to go ahead and select dev, save. Okay, so now this is a new server that I spun up. It's gonna ask to migrate some of these changes already, which is fine. I would say if you have an environment where you already are in production, that's going to be a bit of a different method that we'll discuss in some of the best practices section. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and continue. It has my items and has packs. So great. Okay, so now while that is syncing, I'm going to go ahead and do the same things here in my UAT environment. So I turn this on and I'm going to choose production. As you notice, there's no UAT or QA environment. As far as XSOAR is concerned, there's only prod and development, which is one of the reasons why I like to demo this for customers, especially if they're going to be using a third environment, so we can review how to push that data. So I'm going to go ahead and get this set up now for my UAT branch. And now all I need to do is add the private key. No passphrase. And now what you see here is not an error. It's really the message that you get the first time you SSH into a server, for example. So yes, I'm going to go ahead and continue. So it authenticates the fingerprint. Great. Now I should be able to see my branches. So here I know I'm in my UAT environment. So I'm going to choose my UAT branch and hit save. Okay. So now what's happening here, it's saying, well, you have synced to this UAT branch and there's content there that isn't present. So this is going to be removed. So one thing to keep in mind here, when you sync to your branch, it's going to pull content from your branch down into your environment. So if you don't have any data in the branch or the data that you want, the information you have on your server is going to be removed. So in this case, these are all new environments. That's quite all right. So I'm going to go ahead and choose discard. Now, if you are already live and in production, one thing that you would want to do before you set this up is to back up your content. So the way that you do that is about troubleshooting, and you scroll all the way down to the bottom, and then you export your content. So this is my production environment. So if this was something where I'm setting up a dev to prod situation, then I would want to make sure and just back everything up before I turn this on, just in case if I lose anything, I'm not dead in the water. We will review some of the best practices on how to do this in a live environment after the demo. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and go to settings, my content repo. I'm going to turn that on. Now, again, we have to be very careful here. This is not a development. This is a production environment. So I'm going to toggle over to production. And put in my keys. Great. So now I'm going to choose my prod branch, hit save. And I'm going to go ahead and discard. Okay, so going back to the dev while that syncs, we notice a couple things here. The first thing we see, maybe get my arrow. You see the content is up to date. We also see now a refresh. And then on the side, we see our dev ribbon, okay? So those are the major changes. One thing that we do notice, we still have access to the marketplace down on the lower left here. So there are some indications that you're in dev. So that's something to keep in mind here. And have that ribbon. Now I'm going to go to my UAT environment. You notice I don't have a production. I still have my UAT. but I did now receive a content that's up to date. But if I notice down in the lower left, I don't have my marketplace. This is by design. Everything that you're going to be doing now in terms of pushing your packs is going to be done in your dev environment. So now if I come to my production, I have now the same thing. Everything is up to date and missing my marketplace. So everything looks good. I know that now my branches. Now, once I have my branches set up, we do not change this. You just leave it alone. Another thing I want to point out on my dev that I have is my local changes. So this is where we're going to now talk about how to make changes, my recommendations on modifying, so that way you know what's been changed, by who, when, and how that gets pushed in through the dev to prod process. So here, again, I don't see my local changes. So everything, all development now is going to be done on your dev server. So now that we have our branches synced, I'm going to make some changes to a playbook. So here are the standard playbooks. I created one already for the demo called Paul Test Push. So here I have 3 tasks. So I want to make changes to this, and I want to push those changes and propagate them to my UAT and prod environment. So I'm going to go ahead and edit, and I'm just going to add a new task, and I'm just going to call this task 4, for example. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Okay, great. So now I've added that task in, made a modification. Now, a lot of customers I work with at that point, they just hit save playbook because I made my changes and I'm good with that. So save and then push. But what I recommend now that you've done this is get in the habit of, instead of saving playbook, when you are finished or you're making major changes to the playbook or automation, the principle's still the same. We do save version for the current playbook. So here is, I recommend the who, what, where, why, when method. So who, what, why, when. Now you don't have to use this. Here's where you can create something that works best for you and your organization. But for the purposes of the demo, who made the changes? Paul Overton. What changes did I make? Added a task 4. Why? Task 4 is doing X, Y, Z function. When? Today's the 27th, 2022. And then Paul's test push playbook. So again, this is just an example of what I would recommend. You can make a modification of this. So now I hit update playbook. So now I come out and I'm going to go to my settings. And I'm going to go to my local changes. In here, I have all of the local changes. Now, again, this is also a new push I haven't pushed yet. So if I had already pushed the content before I made that modification, I wouldn't see all of this. I would literally just see the changes that I've made. Now, the other thing that you'll see here, this is coming in as a new playbook. If I had created and pushed this content already and went and modified this, I would see that this was modified. Now I have here my message. You can't really see it, but I have the who, And it was a good thing I did that, because if you notice here, it was changed by admin. I did not log out and log in under my local user. The other thing I like to point out too is if I go to my audit trail, I do see that a change was made by admin. I see it was Paul's test push, but I don't know what changed. So if you were running into a situation where you had to if you broke something, pushing something that didn't work, you would know where it was. Now I have here is added by task 4, etc. I also see now I have my items in my packs. So I have not done a push. I do have the option of not pushing my packs, only pushing my items. I can select all, or I can mix and match. So for the purposes of the demo, I'm not going to push everything. I'm going to go ahead and just push my pulse test push. And I'm not going to push any packs, again, for the purpose of the demo, but I do want to talk about packs just real quick. The packs will not push credentials. So if I come into my integration, and you see here, I already have my Intel feed pulling. So if I go to this instance, this content will not propagate. So like the API key, when I push that over. So what I recommend is making sure that you're up to date on all versions of XSOAR as well. When I push my content packs, I want to keep the instance name the same. If I have this Unit 42 in my UAT and prod environment, I would not recommend changing this name to match the environment that you're in. You want to just leave this alone. You also want to make sure if I go to about and I go to my version, that the version and the builds especially are the same across all the environments. So I'm good here. So I push those changes. Now I'm going to go to my Git. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and see that was 1 minute ago. So I'm going to go ahead and create the merge request. So here I know that I pushed from dev. So now I'm going to go ahead and create that merge request. And here I have what added task 4, why task 4 is doing X, Y, and Z, when, where. I can change this title. It brought the who in. So I can just change this to okay. So now one of the things I recommend here is unselect delete source branch. You never want to delete the source branches, again, because you're now connected to those branches across your environments. So now I remove the delete source branch and I create the merge. I do one more check. Oh, and I'm glad I did one more check because as you see here, I'm pushing dev into main. So glad I took it slow. So I changed this branch. So I want to test this in my UAT environment. So one important point to take away here, I have 3 environments, but I only have one ability to push. This means that all of my changes now are going to be propagated through Git. So when I'm ready to push everything through to production, it's really going to happen in that Git environment. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and go dev to UAT, compare. So now I have modify Paul test playbook. I have my little blurb here that I put in. I'm going to go ahead and unselect the source branch, because again, I'm doing this because now I just changed the branches. So I'm back here again. I create the merge. Okay, great. The other thing that I recommend as well is have an approval process. So here you can choose to approve. I'm going to go ahead and approve that. The other thing I want to mention, I want to make sure we're good on time here for questions. Do not make any changes in Git, so don't make any changes in code here. If you make changes here and push, the next time you push from your dev environment, those changes will be overwritten when you pull them into production. So if you have to make a change here, then you just want to clone the branch, but be very careful because you could get out of sync. So I just recommend don't make any changes here when you review. If you need to make changes after it's been reviewed, then you would want to go back to your dev environment and make those changes. So now I have everything approved. I'm going to go ahead and merge it. And that's done. So now I'm on my user accepted tested environment. I'm going to go ahead and log out of admin. And now I'm going to log in as a tester. Okay, so one thing I did here as well is I made icons for my users. Let's see here. If you notice, now I have my contents up to date. I want to go ahead and check for new content. Now I'm moving quickly here, so I'm just going to force this. What I see now is content version is now available for install. And now when I come to my release notes, I see that if, Paul's test push, I see, oh, okay, this was changed by Paul. Okay, new task was added. Task 4 is doing this, when, and okay, where it was done on this playbook. Because again, I can't make any modifications here. So this is where using that process to notate what you did is really good for change control, and also letting your testers know or your end users know what was changed and what they're installing. So I'm going to go ahead and install that content. Okay, great. Now I see my content's up to date. I can come to my playbook, and I've got my Paul's test push, and I should see task 4. Okay, so while that's propagating, I'm going to come back to my branch here, and we're coming up on time. I want to give at least a couple more minutes for questions. So let's see here. So I'm going to create a new merge request. So let's say that the Pulse test push came through just fine. Again, it's just taking a little while to propagate there. So I'm going to create a new merge request. And now I'm going to select my UAT prod, because let's assume I tested everything was working out okay. I can't re-push those changes because they've already been done. So I have to now manage it in my GitHub. So now I'm going to compare, continue. I have my content there, keeping the source branch, going from UAT to prod. I'm going to go ahead and create that merge request. going to go ahead and approve, delete source branches unchecked. I'm going to go ahead and merge. And now I'm going to go ahead and log out and log in as my production analyst. So I'm in as my production analyst, and the concept is the same. I should be able to still pull in my repo. And I'll check for new content, versions available, and then there's my playbook. So we have 10 minutes left for questions. So that's just that is the process. Now there's a couple of things that I do want to mention in the advanced settings. So I'm going to go back to my dev here because I'm logged in as admin. You do have another layer of control. You can add an additional server configuration to only allow admin to push changes. So that would be UI version control admin only, true. And if you want more granular control over your packs, there is another server configuration that I can add. That would be UI version control push partial packs. So this ensures now that only admin can push changes. So if you have somebody, say you're working with professional services and you give them the ability to make changes in your dev environment, but you want to maintain control of when that gets pushed, those are the settings I would recommend. So with that, I'm going to go back to slideshow here because that's effectively the end of the demo, and quickly run through some of the key takeaways. So what you want to decide if you're going to do this is how many environments do you need, and is the hardware spec'd accordingly. So if you just want to stick with a dev and production environment and you want to skip the UAT, that's perfectly okay, but you need at least the 2 environments. How are you distinguishing the environments to reduce human error? Are you adding in icons? What are your RBAC rules? So again, as you saw, I logged in as admin across all of the environments and then logged out and had, a tester and then, a production analyst. What notation method works best for your organization? I give you an example of what it looks like, how you can maintain that level of change control in your repo, and also show your analysts what's being changed. Are your branches configured? Do not disable them. Don't make changes, code changes in your repo environment. Do not delete the source branches after merging. That will also break sync. Always back up your data. So those are definitely some of the key takeaways I hope you get from this. Now setting you up for success, we're going to go through just some of the Q&As that come up. So I recommend you set up your branches before you implement this. You don't change the integration instance names, review that. You don't install anything on your creating production environment. Now the marketplace has been removed, but you want to make sure when you set this up that you only do your development on dev. Make sure on the same version and build across your environment. Again, don't delete your source branches. I've done that before, so this is why I'm repeating it. It's not fun when that happens. Again, repeating that do not edit content in the repo. Can't emphasize that enough. If you have to make changes, you can clone the branch and work from there, but you do open yourself to some level of risk. The other thing that you want to do is make a commitment to a process if you decide to do this. You can certainly just use dev to prod to just push the changes and let it be. But if you define your process around this, it really will set you up for more success, as you saw in the demo. All changes, again, must be done in the UI editors or API PyCharm plugins. So if you have those still need to be done and integrated into the XSOAR server. This is something that you're not going to be able to edit outside or make changes outside of the XSOAR server. The dev server still requires access to the internet. The dev needs to be configured for any integrations that would be pushed to prod. So again, API keys are not copied. Passwords, those things won't get pushed. Make sure your firewall rules are open for any proxy engines. So again, you're testing on dev. So just make sure that when you push those changes into your UAT that are in production, that you have all the engines and everything set up correctly for those integrations to work. You don't want to test on dev, think it's fine, push to these other environments, and it's not working because it's in a different networking environment. So frequently asked questions. Can I use this on ordering production? Yes. But it might be easier to transition your production environment to your development environment. So if you're already in production, just consider your production your dev, and push your changes into a new production environment. That will definitely be a little bit cleaner than trying to set up a new dev environment and then just push those changes into your production environment. If you have questions about that, I would definitely schedule a session with your CSA to review to make sure you're doing it properly. Don't run into issues. Is this supported for multi-tenant? Yes. The principles are still the same, but the configuration and propagation is a little bit different. So just make sure and review that documentation or set up a session with your CSA. What can I do if the system fails to sync to a branch? So if a branch sync fails, the first step is to turn it off and turn it back on. Now keep in mind, when you sync to a branch, it's going to pull that content down. So just keep that in mind. However, if you have issues after that, go ahead and open up a support case. Or feel free to open a support case if you just want to make sure that you're not going to lose any data. But again, back up your data through downloading the content. You should be okay. The other questions that come up, I no longer have the marketplace in my production or QA servers. This is by design. We reviewed that today. Again, integration conditions will not be pushed. I don't see the QA UTA option in content repos. This is by design. Again, you only have the one dev and one prod option. You will have to manage those changes through Git. What can I do if the system fails to sync to a branch? We already discussed that. Are there plans to allow pushing of instance credentials? Nope. And this will not be considered as a feature request. That does come up, so just so you know there. Are there dependency checks? There are dependency checks in the content packs. I did not review that for the sake of time. So it will check if there's dependencies within the content packs, but for playbooks, fields, scripts, etc. layouts, it will need to be done manually. There's no check for that. And finally, can I mix and match hosted and on-prem servers? Yes, you can. And these are the combinations. You can do the XSOAR prod hosted. You can do on-prem for your dev. I have customers that are hosted that are decided to implement a UAT environment on-prem. So you can mix and match. And I think that allows a couple more minutes for questions. Hopefully I see some things come through in the Q&A and chat. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. We have about 2 minutes left. And thank you, Cole, for moderating the questions. I know there was a lot that came through. We had a pretty good attendance, so appreciate everybody attending here. Before we close out, just want to thank you very much for coming, and please provide your feedback. If we do hear that feedback, we do take it seriously, and it really helps to improve the overall experience. Feedback is what went into this demo today. So hopefully you got some value out of it, and please let us know how we did in any areas where we can improve in the future.